hack the money system and understand the obfuscations and sophistry around it, to really fundamentally understand what is money in the present context, what has it historically represented, and can we restructure it to usurp the power from these people and get it back into the common fold? These are the relevant questions. That's where real power is. Trailer for Ivory Tower, the documentary.
When you start college, that's the time when you have the chance to experiment, when you have the chance to open yourself up to new things, when you can discover who you are and who you might become.
Tell me one thing. Yes. Is my daughter going to have a job and she's not going to come back home after it's done?
The very concept of the institution of higher learning is about to be broken.
Our nation's combined student loan debt has now hit $1 trillion.
College tuition has increased more than any other good or service in the entire U.S. economy.
It's like a subprime mortgage broker that ripped you off.
Original balances in the tens and $20,000s of dollars, ballooning up into the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
If I do ever have kids, my private loans will be directly passed to them, even if I die. It's a nightmare.
The government will make $184 billion off our kids trying to get an education.
Colleges have turned into these large businesses. It's a feeding frenzy to outbuild their rivals.
It created a race.
You've got to cater to out-of-state students who want to party.
Some of our leading presidents can be quite shameless in the size of their compensation.
The older generations that criticize the millennials grew up in a time when you could go to a state university and pay your way through with summer jobs.
There's going to be a collapse. People just don't want to pay for it anymore.
What's that, Peter?
Yeah, Peter Schiff.
Don't
go to school.
It wasn't to the cost of educating the students.
I want this for my kids. It's just too bad it costs $60,000 a year.
Peter Thiel is offering college students $100,000 if they drop out of school and start their own business.
If you didn't go to college, what would you do instead?
When I went to school, there was no way to access the services that higher education provided. Now you can.
I want to better myself. If I dropped out of Harvard, I'm back where I started.
What kind of a society do we want to be? America has been all about critical thinking.
There has to be a change coming.
Well, here's a great statistic from the Daily Kos, which is a blog aggregator. The headline is, "Someone finally pulled the 1% and it's not pretty." There was a series of questions, about a dozen plus, asked to just the general public and the elite. And here's one of them. The federal government should invest more in worker retraining and education to help workers adapt to changes in the economy. 30% of the elite are in favor of that. 57% of the public are. So when you're seeing this, these kind of movies coming out and illustrating all the problems of higher education, a lot of them are well-founded, but what is the intention of that criticism coming from? That should be the question.
It's giving pressure valves to smooth over the transition from when college is going to be just for some and not for all.
Yeah, it's basically saying get ready for
we'll have some scholarships for you.
Society.
Here, have a business loan, but you're not going to be able to go to school.
They need to reassert the permanent underclass and keep perpetuating the underclass. And if you think you have access to higher education, then that's obviously a problem. Of course, a lot of the abuses they're going to be bringing up are, of course, well-founded. But what is the solution to that? I would be interested to see what they say.
Yeah.
And who they're citing and like the kind of
they did have Elizabeth Warren in that also, and she proposed using of the Federal Reserve to open up a credit window for student loans.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they go with that route, and that would be a great, boon for society.
I mean, I'm someone
refinance them at 0%.
Basically self-taught in everything I know. I have an associate's degree. That's the highest from a trade school. That's the highest I went through college because it was clear that they weren't going to be able to teach me more than I could learn on my own at much, much, much cheaper rates. I just looked at, if I got a bachelor's degree here, I would be crushed under debt just by looking at the compounding interest. And at that point, I was like, I got to get out of here. I'm going to just pursue getting technical certifications, becoming adept at the industry that I'm pursuing, and that worked for me. But there are doctors, dentists, lawyers, engineers that need higher education, and they're not going to be able to teach themselves these kind of things on their own. Or if they do so, that's just a huge inefficiency. Why not go to the people that know how to do it and then get the education? I mean, this is why educational institutions exist in the first place. So, what is the solution? There's a huge social mobility aspect about having public finance education.
Yeah.
In other third world countries, and even in Europe, the youth are able to strike. They're able to get politically active. They're able to demand more rights because they're not working, full-time jobs while in full-time school just to keep their head above water. So this whole thing of debt slavery and the working to go to school is a huge social control apparatus. And the elite's answer to that is not to ever give an inch, of course, but to say, get ready for this two-tiered society. We'd rather live in a third world place behind our gated communities than allow you any level of social mobility. So you're going to get movies that come out to justify that.
There was a Reuters article about how the BRICS BRICS nations are going to open up a bank. They're the 5 BRIC nations, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, will likely agree to fund their $100 billion development effort, giving them the same, so they're all going to give $100 billion, giving them the same right in the multilateral bank that could start lending in 2 years. So this is good. It could be a great alternative to the IMF and their brutal austerity that they force.
Did you say 100 million or 100 billion?
100 billion.
Oh, well, that's actual something to that's nothing to sneeze at there.
No.
If it was 100 million, that would just be token.
Yeah.
But with all the pressure put on Russia and China and Iran lately, they realize that it's time to act.
Yeah, and they are creating economic blocks now, and they're going to use them more correctly than we're using ours with NAFTA, which could be something better, a lot better, instead of what it is.
Race to the bottom, baby. It is May 30th, 2014. This is the New Deal Renaissance podcast with Matt Folger.
Evan Spinoni.
And this is a different podcast, different kind of political mindset than you're probably going to find in a lot of other places. Socially, culturally, historically aware, and always solutions-oriented.
Yeah, that's really the main goal of this, is to find solutions to these problems that a lot of people are talking about, but most of them won't really go into that much depth into how to solve them. Like, we just read this article from a Harvard Business Review about how Germany has a great innovation system and America doesn't, and it kind of just doesn't really talk about any real solutions. And that's the case. I mean, it gives some points, but it's not a point. It's not an actual way to do this. It's more like coffee shop rhetoric.
If you listen to the modern right wing and the libertarians and the kind of doomsday fanatics out there, it's buy a bunch of guns, stockpile a bunch of water filters and MREs, and somehow God will show the way.
Yeah, there's
after the apocalypse.
There's a lot of that, and there's also quite a bit of people that are essentially just so disenfranchised with Republicans that they had to go another way. And the best part about libertarians is they're anti-war. They're a good coalition for that.
Yeah, these different social groups have their benefits. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at the left, it's just a big pile of kindergartners. Basically, they can't organize themselves to do anything.
Yeah.
They're really a benign influence.
Libertarians are just wrong about economics, really.
Mm-hmm. And we are spending a lot of time in the initial podcast. The second half of this podcast tackles Peter Schiff. This is actually part of a 7-part series of disassembling a Joe Rogan Peter Schiff interview that was 2.5 hours. It took us 8 hours to disassemble it
people that push libertarian economics is that they use all this stuff that makes sense to hide these terrible economics. They'll say, I don't care if you're gay and you get married. You know what? We're not for war. America shouldn't get involved in overseas conflicts. The drug war is wrong. Those are all things that are very attractive that they say. And then they'll talk about deflationary crash. You need to buy gold standard. And gold standard is hamstringing yourself compared to what the actual wealth of an economy can be.
Yeah, it's all these old ideas kind of dredged out of the history bucket and cobbled together with a bunch of new social issues that have a lot of traction. And, a lot of people were taken in by Ron Paul. I was back in 2007, 2008.
Only one talking about peace.
Yeah, only peace candidate. And I was like, that's fine. And then, if I have to swallow all this other poison of libertarian economics, okay, you want these economic ideas too? Okay, fine. If that's what that's what it takes to get to peace. You'll notice with a lot of the right wing and the libertarian, Ron Paul is very guilty of this, that it's a hysterical, fear-based ideology where they got to get you afraid first, get you afraid, get you angry, and then it's, deliver the payload of whatever they want. And that's not at all the approach we're taking here. It's about education. This country, humanity, civilization has faced much worse crises than what we're presently in.
Yeah, for real. This is not that hard. Trade tariff, economic development, interior improvements of the economy so you can have a 22nd century economy. It's not that hard.
Like, do you have an interest in information?
Are you willing to question yourself and be wrong and then look at that and be like, all right, why was I wrong? What was attractive about this? I mean, I was a fire-breathing libertarian in the 2012.
Oh, me too. Well, yeah, but prior to that, but we were at both one point fire-breathing libertarians. But I never make my ideas my identity. And we encourage everyone to have that same opinion, where your ideas don't define you. They aren't fundamentally what makes you, you. And so you should not have any kind of personal attachment to them.
They're like hats.
Clothing.
Hey, this one looks good. This one fits. Hey, does it actually work?
It's a layer of something, right? And fundamentally, it's not what you are. But if you want to make it who you are, then you're stuck and you can never really get anywhere because
you got one road to go down.
Mm-hmm. You're choosing pride over humility.
You have to be fair and be like, when someone proves a point to you, you got to be like, God damn it. You're right.
That's why, most things I read
doesn't feel good.
Are things that are totally contrary to what I believe. And since this is our first broadcast on the UCY network,
hello UCY.
We're also maybe cover some more theoretical background stuff. Where me and Evan have been kind of led, and then how we actually met, is we both kind of went down the same road of learning and finding what our lineage and heritage really is.
A love of history is how I got here.
As Americans.
What? Yeah, I like America.
Well, studying American history. So what we try to represent is, I call it American traditionalism, which is Hamilton, Henry Clay, Henry Carey, Abraham Lincoln, aspects of the Republican Party post-Civil War, and then the New Deal era.
Some of Grant stuff.
Yeah, I was watching a C-SPAN thing about him today of how he's one of the most distorted historical figures, because basically all the Democratic propaganda at the time of the Northern Democrat Party and then also the Southern Democrats is basically the mythology that built our modern conceptions of who Grant is.
Alcoholic war hero?
Yeah, exactly. The butcher alcoholic. Also, from the beginning point of wisdom of understanding politics, we take the position of understanding what we're experiencing right now with the modern American oppression, war system, war machine, as imperialism. Defining all that as imperialism, because that's the historical constant. Where if you follow someone like Alex Jones or the right-wing libertarians fall into this trap where they think it's this, I call it a Hobbesian manifestation of the state.
Yeah, that there's some sort of flaw in humans that if they get into positions of power in the state form, not in private business because there's this free market that can check it in their theory, which I think can be exposed greatly, that this government becomes this evil entity and it must be kept as far, be able to drown in a bathtub sort of government. But when you get that, you are going to be left behind in the world. You're going to be, taken advantage of by people that have a lot of money and power, and you're not going to have any way to fight it, because that's how government came out to be. It was a feudal system. Then people fought up against that. No, we get to have rights. We get to say stuff here. And the king's like, fine. I was just reading about Philip the Fair, who in France in the early 1300s, instituted places for middle-class people to go and air their grievances. And it was really beneficial to the society, and then there was a reaction to it.
I mean, if you look at any,
and so
the Magna Carta, habeas corpus,
the government was created by people to fight against tyranny.
Right, yeah. And you look at the most early institutions of bills of rights in effect, and they are, in effect, the state inveighing against barbarism, feudalism, mafioso mentality, basically. Where there's the big guy, he has the thugs, he's the biggest, the most cutthroat, ruthless guy around, so he scares people. The weaker fall behind him, he becomes a tyrant, and people fall into that. That inherently is just a fundamental aspect of human relations, and doesn't need any kind of application of a label of state or not to exist. But when the libertarians and the Hobbesians, of which the libertarians are, come out, they'll say that if you call it the state, it becomes this evil monstrosity and can never be used for good. And it's a fallen world. Humans are all flawed.
Calvinist.
If you're looking for angels, you're never going to find one. So you might as well just, if that's your litmus test for good and evil, then
build your moat, get your gun, and be like a
just give up now. So, but what we represent is when you look really closely at history, there is times in which the state can be a greater force for good than ill, and it's always a mixed bag, right? I mean, this is how moral choices are in the adult world.
Yeah.
And if you want to act in the world, there's going to be a grayness to whatever you're doing, but it doesn't mean that it can be more bad than good or good than bad. Basically, libertarians always say that it has to be more evil than good. It's utopian. That's the problem with it.
But on the notion of imperialism, back to the article in the Harvard Business Review, where the United States does have a lot of innovation is in the military. Cutting-edge military. That's what it does. The military-industrial complex robs you, and what needs to happen is there needs to be a conversion of those technologies from military use to civilian use.
And when we say imperialism, we mean something really specific. And the tragedy really is that when I say, or Evan says, imperialism in the modern context, most people have no idea what we're talking about. They think, empire, whatever.
Rome.
Any country that was big, you're just changing the word country or nation with the word empire because it's expansive. No. It means something really, really specific, and we have to understand what that means.
Yeah.
And we will do so. But in the short definition, imperialism means basically an oligarchy, a financial oligarchy that is controlling the apparatus of state and the society through various mechanisms, propaganda, media, education. There's this governing ruling class based on finance, based on financial power, that perpetuates a financial system for its own enrichment at the expense of the rest of the world. At the expense of the domestic workforce, at the expense of the third world, at the expense of every other developed country on the planet. That we're all paying into this 0.0001% for these oligarchs to run the society.
Yeah, and they'll do things like write books about how their lives are and create soap operas, like Jane Austen. A lot of her writing going on during the time of when Great Britain was involved in the opium trade. I mean, and these huge estates that Mr. Darcy and whoever were all drug dealers. They're like El Chapo in Mexico.
It's so cute, though. I mean, you read
like
Pride and Prejudice, you're just like
they're
blushing.
So noble.
And you're like,
Look
it's
at their
so cute.
Social folk. They're just
it's so great.
Can I pick up you while you hurt yourself? I don't want to see your ankle.
Yeah.
As I'm
killing thousands in the third world as we speak. But I mean, this is the detachment, and this is the romanticism of these people.
This is why it's important
like
to understand history.
Is this the closed societal group mentality at the expense of everyone else? So within the oligarchy, it behaves in a certain capacity where they all, love each other, they defend each other. This is, the real society. We're the higher class. We're the higher species. And people outside of that, you're scum. You're worthless. You're dirt. Basically, that's what we're against. The separation, basically. What the money creates is a system of arbitrary power. What the system of arbitrary power creates is a system of separation. And then the system of separation creates this group of people who genuinely think that they're above humanity and that things, to the general well-being of the world and society and civilization and just the planet as a whole, don't apply to them. Or if they're even willing to acknowledge those problems, they rephrase it in the condition of, with Malthus and the overpopulation theorems.
Yep.
With
I was at work
environmentalism.
today, and we were on the highway. And this guy next to me was like, too many people, man. I was like, no, the roads just aren't big enough. That's the problem. I mean, that's how far it's seeped in. Like, you say Malthus, and you're like, who is this guy? Some 17th century writer? That's kind of shitty. All he does is make up scenarios and then prove them. Like, he'll make up a scenario and be like, see, this is why overpopulation. Look at that. I just made this thing up. That's my answer to you. But it's pushed so well and by so many people that it trickles down to where you're sitting next to a guy at a day labor gig and they're thinking spouting overpopulation instead of trying to think about, wow, maybe we should get some bigger roads. I could like to work on those roads.
Mm. And this is the thing, is it's so ubiquitous, it's so just permeating every aspect of social life that when we talk about Malthus or other progenitors of large-scale ideologies by which 99% of the population are part and parcel to, is that we talk about these things because they're important, because they're intrinsically believed by everyone in the population, even if they don't know it. So that guy never has heard the name Malthus.
Nope.
Has no clue who he is, yet is spouting things directly from his book. Because these things are propagated throughout the society because of imperialism and because of ruling class privilege and dominance and how they see the world. So the question is, what we should all be asking ourselves, is how much of what we think is because we actually thought it, or it's actually real, or how much of that is a social construct based on generations of oligarchical privilege and oligarchical shaping of the society.
And a counter to that argument would be like, well, who's going to pay for these roads? You're going to have all these just make-work projects? Like, it's just government waste? And the way you pay for them is through a system called public credit. And that is not a well-known system. Mm-hmm. That is on purpose. Like, I read Ron Chernoff's biography of George Washington. They mentioned public credit once.
And it has glowing reviews from the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and the New York.
All the fancies.
The Economist, on the back. So understand that there's a financial interest that exists that really is like a Hobbesian abstraction of the state, which really has its own dynamic nature, interests, and self-governance of how it operates, and that is real. But what is not real is the artificial construct, the libertarian, Hobbesian, liberal nature, in other words, of state. That doesn't actually exist. So they've got you to believe, if you're a liberal or libertarian, that the state has this nature, yet there's no such thing called oligarchy, and there's no such thing called imperialism, which actually does have a nature, which myself have become so adept at understanding that I personally saw the chemical weapon attacks in Syria happen a month before they happened. I put it out on my blog. That the lack of a new war and a new enemy was a fundamental problem for empire, and they had to rectify it some way or another. A month later, chemical weapon, not even a month, within a matter of weeks, the chemical weapons attack happened in Syria. Same thing with Ukraine. Talking about Ukraine, saying like the empire was rebuffed in Ukraine temporarily, but that was the next focal point. Bam, Ukraine, Rada, fascists, overthrow the government. Now it's the new hotspot. I mean, so when you really know how oligarchy functions, how the ruling class acts, you can see what they're doing, and it's not actually that hard to do. They're fairly sloppy. The only reason that they can get away with it is because everyone's such a brainwashed zombie and ignoramus.
Yeah, the corruption of the media is really a huge problem. Just the fact that we allow them to censor the pictures of the bodies of soldiers coming home from war. The fact that that's okay. Now, national security can't do it. We can't show you the gruesome stuff in war.
Yeah, I go to a movie and there's like this horrific, hellish fucking previews for all these torture snuff films.
It's true. And
it's like, well, that's not real, and yet we're making that real in any way. But these things that are real and are horrible, we can't see them because that would scare somebody. I don't know. It's just fucking weird.
Well, it shows that like they want you to be desensitized to violence, while when you see it as in a negative way, like in a real way, violence is always negative almost. I guess it's important sometimes. Like I was watching a lot of documentaries on the Eastern Front. What do I actually want to say?
Point being is, if you understand what we're combating as imperialism, then it becomes evident like where the weak spots are. Because the oligarchs are not afraid of you getting a bunch of guns and water filters and hiding in your basement. They're really not. Nope. They really could care less. They're going to steal your pension system. They're going to privatize your water system. Yeah. They're going to privatize your electrical system. They're going to make sure your children have no education. They're going to make sure you're dirt poor. And so you can keep, you'll probably end up eating the bullets when you starve to death if you become that deindustrialized. But it's a system of theft, and slavery. And we live in an economic system complex enough where the theft and the slavery is indirect, where it's not, you're not going to be directly cast in iron chains and put on a plantation somewhere. But ask the people working in a Walmart in some poor rural district that's been blown out by a Walmart if they feel that free. Are you feeling free? Well, no, you're a wage slave. And so they don't need these really old barbarous systems of control and top-down administrated systems of slavery, because the system of wage slavery already works well enough. They can maintain a system of high unemployment, lowering wages. So these things are indirect, and the problem with the libertarians, once again, is you're engaged in a defense mechanism from hundreds of years ago, not understanding that it's already gone way past that onto the next level. And if you're not competing on that level, your primitive stuff you're doing to try to compete with it just doesn't make any difference. It is irrelevant. So owning a gun is not a political act, in short.
Yeah.
And you got to get politically active. You got to get educated, and then you got to collaborate with people and forming political organizations, because that's all that the establishment responds to.
Hear, hear.
That's all you're going to be able to do to take power. No amount of guns is going to reindustrialize.
They're not going to educate
Detroit.
The kids. Yeah, Detroit is a great example of what the problems, what happens when they actually go full blown, and how we can fix this. This should be a national conversation. The best minds should be coming together, we got this great project, we can revitalize this city.
Yeah, and when you look at also the libertarian model of it, and I harp on this so much because this is what we're tackling in the next two episodes on, the last two episodes of this Peter Schiff dialogue, and the first two episodes we're doing with UCY, is that they look at the system of power in the state and say that, okay, that's the all-inclusive, that's the end-all, be-all way to understand it, is power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Of course, that wonderful quote from the British oligarch who said that. Anyway, but when you look even deeper than that these systems of power really internally are a system of finance. And that is where the power comes from. Now, if you want to blame things on the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and, all these well-worn, shop-worn names that the libertarians bring up a lot.
Yep.
Why are these people powerful? Well, because they're rich. Because they're incredibly rich. They have dynastic wealth. And that's where all their power actually comes from, in reality. They can have this influence and this power and these ideas, and they can be their own personality can have a huge influence on society, but all that arbitrary power doesn't come because of, their God Emperor status, or, we think we're a bunch of primitive people, like they thought Montezuma was the direct disciple of God, or any kind of thing like that. There's no theological mystification of why we think these people are in power. They're in power because they have money. It all boils back down to that. And if you can attack the money system and understand the obfuscations and sophistry around it, to really fundamentally understand what is money in the present context, what has it historically represented, and can we restructure it to usurp the power from these people and get it back into the common fold, these are the relevant questions. Yeah. That's where real power is. Now, your guns, you may feel really powerful with them, but you're not going to solve any problems. Keep them if it makes you feel safe. But just understand that is not going to help anything in the long term. Or it's not going to solve a single problem. And that all the problem solving becomes from organization, collaborating with people, and trying to seize the levers of power for yourself, to self-govern. That's the revolution. That's the American Revolution in a nutshell. Self-governance, not to be ruled by monarchs, oligarchs, other systems of arbitrary power. Now, when you structure things that way, things look a lot different. Raising the minimum wage. How do you fight when we just talked about wage slavery recently? And Walmart. Well, Walmart perpetuates off a system of low wages and crushing wages, crushing labor down in these areas, not paying, wage theft.
And paying them all minimum wage. Amount in for their suppliers too. That's something they do. And the way that they do that is they become a monopoly. They're the only game in town. We're the only store in a lot of places. So
You're even taking over the supplier distribution networks to sell their competitors, stuff like that. So how do you fight that? Okay, you have whatever guns of your choice. Now go try to fix that problem. You know, what are you going to do? Just shoot up a Walmart? What's that going to solve? You're going to go shoot the people that, that run Walmart? What's that going to do? Other people just take their place. Now, the problem with Walmart is it's a political institution. It's an economic institution. So you have to learn how to combat things on the political level and on the economic level on those terms. It's like if I'm trying to get to like an FM dial with my AM station or trying to like read x-rays with a radio or something like that. It's just not in the same wavelength. So if you don't exist on these other wavelengths, fundamentally you're an inert unit. You're not able to do anything. Now, how would you bring it to Walmart knowing that is what it perpetuates on, that it feeds on lowering the value of labor, on crushing labor, on making people poorer? What do you do to combat that directly? Well, the $15 an hour minimum wage seems like a direct frontal attack to that. It's a torpedo. It's a shot off the bow against Walmart. Anyway, understanding these things in the economic context is the way out of the problem.
Well, let's talk about, I guess we do kind of in Peter Schiff, but the $15 minimum wage.
Right.
In Seattle, that's one of the few places in the country where that's going on. What are the arguments against this? Seattle set to destroy economy with highest minimum wage by Rachel Alexander. It's May 20th, 2014. The city of Seattle is about to phase in a drastic increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour, thanks to the efforts of its new socialist city councilwoman, Karishma Sanwat. Seattle's far-left mayor, Ed Murray, has now taken up the effort and is expected to pass into law by the city council soon. The increase will affect nearly 100,000 workers, including most all fast food workers, around 30% of the jobs. So, 100,000 workers in Seattle don't make $15 an hour, make less than $15 an hour. So that's an entire underclass of people that don't make $15 an hour. The libertarian line is to be like, how could they do this? Where's this money going to come from? All these prices are going to rise. Around 30% of all jobs in Seattle currently pay less than $15 an hour. What is going on is a pay-to-pay politics led by unions. That's what unions do. They raise your wages. The losing mayoral candidate incumbent Mike McGinn unsuccessfully tried to save his campaign with a union quid pro quo. He received a $100,000 contribution from the United Food and Commercial Workers Union 21 last year. Coincidentally timed about the same time he came out publicly opposing the new Whole Foods development in West Seattle.
Well, with even what Evan has already said, I'm just going to go back to the Daily Kos thing and just cite this one statistic. When asked to the 1%, the minimum wage should be high enough so that no family with a full-time worker falls below the official poverty line. Only 40% of the 1% were in favor of that. Now, the public was 78% in favor of that. Now, so when Evan says $15 an hour minimum wage, and someone out there's knee-jerk ideological reaction is, well, who's going to pay for it? How could these small business owners afford to pay for it? Now, where is that coming from? Why do you think that? Why is that your instinctive reaction? And is that your opinion? Or is that some opinion that's been actually foisted upon you and you're just regurgitating it? Why are you acting and having the same opinions that some super rich plutocrat would have while not being that?
Yeah. It's one of our counter arguments is, as a result of the SeaTac hike, because it first started in SeaTac, at $15, the Clarion Hotel closed its full-service restaurant, laying off 15 people. General Manager Perry Wall said the increase is going to hurt unskilled workers, the poor, the most. He told Seattle, "I just think unskilled workers are going to have a harder time finding jobs." So then, to quote, you're going to have people from as far away as Bellevue or Tacoma wanting these jobs, and they're going to come with skills and experience. For $15 an hour, they'll go the extra distance. Now, if Tacoma or Bellevue had $15 an hour, which they can do, then that problem goes away. Ultimately, increasing the $15 minimum wage will force the lowest skilled workers onto government assistance. Once people are dependent upon government, they will continue voting for wasteful policies that they benefit from, as in taking places in cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Stockton. Seattle has stagnated under years of one-party rule by the Democrats. Its population increased from 1990 to 2012 from 576,000 to 600. In contrast, Phoenix, which is thriving with a more pro-business climate, saw its population booming during the same period from 900,000 to 1.4 million.
I like it when they pluck these various statistics. Like, this is the statistic to look at, the one and only, to indicate all this other stuff. I'm going to apply all this other stuff on top of that.
Seattle has the 8th worst traffic congestion among the large cities of the United States. Well, if they have all these people, why don't we build more roads? Even though it's only the 22nd largest city, and the price of housing is considered substantially high in contrast with the median income in the area, because there's some really high wage earners in Seattle. Seattle is considered one of the most expensive cities in the nation for cost of living. Working in a fast food restaurant should be a stepping stone to management or owning your own restaurant. How is that possible? You have so many fast food restaurants. If every fast food worker, what about if that's what you got for that time? What are you going to do? Well, I work at Subway. Okay. You get 32 hours a week, because that's just what it is. Well, I'm looking for other work, but I can't find it. Well, so what? Go on government assistance? There's a way to make ends meet.
No.
Can anyone name one major city in America under the decades of Democratic control that is not financial ruin? Unions are destroying the country. They have politicians in their pocket. If these politicians don't support unions, the unions withhold their re-election money in Seattle.
Wow. Yeah, the unions are so powerful.
They're so powerful. The majority of the if unions are so powerful, why are wages so low?
Remember?
So wages should be lower.
Remember the bailout in 2008 where the unions took control and then the government gave the $700 billion to the unions? It wasn't the Wall Street banks. This is the alternative reality version of history that they are promulgating when only like 9% of the workforce is actually unionized. So another fundamental thing about our show, I had this conversation, kind of brief conversation with a friend of mine recently. He's just like, oh, well, I haven't listened to your show. And we were actually out doing some activism. And I was like, hey, man, you're gathering signatures for a local thing to label GMOs, genetically modified food, in Oregon. Like, I have nothing to tell you. I mean, you're out and you're active and you're fighting imperialism, whether you want to call it imperialism or not, or if you know to call it imperialism. Right, so like I got nothing to tell you at this point. Like, do what you're doing, man. But the point is to get people to that point. And so the position of this show is to fundamentally challenge you, to fundamentally make you active politically. And now it's much more convenient to go listen to XYZ Doommonger, and they can, rile you up, get your blood going, raise your blood pressure, and tell you that, the solution is to buy their whatever products or DVDs or water filters, things like that, and just to be afraid. But that's the road of defeat. That's the road of despair. And we refuse to go there. Because if you just get active in understanding, becoming educated, refuting the nonsense, the garbage and the swill that's trying to be foie gras down your throat all the time, and then becoming active, even gathering signatures, it makes a huge difference. I mean, I can tell from personal political battles in Portland that one person's unwillingness to go along with oppression and tyranny and grift and theft and corruption can do a hell of a lot. And so if you're, willing to engage on that level, it's going to make you actually have to have hope, which, it's easier not to. And it's going to make you have to get active at some point. And most people don't want to hear that. They want to hear, I can just hope that this commentator is going to save me, or he's somehow out there fighting the crusade, and I can, wave my white handkerchief in the window as they are out, fighting the Black Knights or whatever it is, slaying the dragon, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, no, the ultimate solution for all political problems is for individuals to become educated, individuals to become active. That's the prerogative. So that's where we were coming from. And if you don't want to participate in that, there's better shows to cater to your want to be afraid or your want to be convinced that you don't have to do anything. So you can go back to being incredibly apathetic, which is actually your own way to be nihilistic and completely self-absorbed, ultimately. Because you can say, oh, everything is out of my hands. I can just go
do
whatever. I'll just lay on the couch playing GTA 4, ripping bong loads. And that's it. Like, that's not just a recreation or a pastime, but that, becomes your life. And it's incredibly unfulfilling. So, when you're ready to hang that up, come to us, and we will try to, we're always educating ourselves and just sharing that process with whoever will listen.
I'm going to play this short YouTube clip. It's about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. And it's by MoveOn.org, which is a known liberal, at least I know it as a liberal organization. And it's raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Democrats are getting ready for a major push.
And it's got
the federal minimum wage to
Robert Reich.
10 cents an hour. Now, that's better than nothing, but it is not enough. The minimum wage should be raised to $15.
I agree.
Incrementally over the next 3 years.
No. Incrementally?
This is why. 1. Had the minimum wage of 1968 been adjusted for inflation, it would be well above $10 an hour today. But the typical worker today is also more than twice as productive as them. Adjusted for both inflation and productivity gains, therefore, the minimum wage should be at least $15 an hour. 2. $10.10 an hour is not enough to lift all workers and their families out of poverty. This is especially true for millions of low-wage workers who want full-time jobs but can only work and find part-time work. Most low-wage workers are not teenagers. They're major breadwinners for their families. 3. Because some employers now pay wages that don't lift their employees out of poverty, the rest of us pay for their Medicaid, food stamps, housing, and other assistance, in effect subsidizing these low-wage employers. Some, like McDonald's, actually advise their employees to use public programs because their pay is just too low. 4. Some jobs may be lost if the minimum is raised to $15, but many more people will be lifted out of poverty. And because low-wage workers will have more money to spend, their spending will create many more jobs. 5. Such a wage increase is more likely to come out of profits than be passed on in higher prices, because most employers of low-wage workers are in intense competition for customers. 6. Since Republicans will no doubt try to push Democrats to go even lower than their $10.10 proposal, it's doubly important to be clear about what's right in the first place. Democrats should be talking about a bigger increase, not listening to Republican demands for a smaller one. 7, and finally, at a time in our nation's history when 95% of all economic gains are going to the top 1%, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour isn't just smart economics, it's the right thing to do.
Then it has a number for call your senators, 202-224-3121. Tell them $15 an hour is what you deserve, and it is. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I thought that was great. I mean,
who could argue? Other than the most recalcitrant Republican blowhard. Fundamentally, if your economic activity is so non-productive that you can't afford to pay your people $15 an hour, then what is your business model exactly? I mean, what is your value creation? What are you trying to do? What's the business model? I'd love to know, because then you have to realize that your business model requires poverty to exist. And that's a fundamental problem. And a lot of smaller business owners have been pushed in that condition, but really not that many small business owners are of that condition.
I mean, there was a time when that wasn't the case. Before the Walmart blowouts, when you had, family businesses that really actually did create wealth, could pay their workers a living wage, like that minimum wage in the 1960s. They decided that's currently more than what we get today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with Walmart, too, it's that somehow a corporation can never take a loss is just sacrilege, right? That we could say, $15 an hour minimum wage, Walmart will have to take it on the chin. And obviously their stock is going to fall as a result of that, because their entire business model is the centrality of what they're doing is fostering and requiring poverty to exist. It's not just that it boosts them, it's that they perpetuate it and they thrive on the poorer people are getting, the more desperate people are getting. They're even taking out life insurance policies against their own employees. So when they, are like, looks like Fred's looking pretty tired over there. I think we're working him to death. We're going to get a life insurance policy on him so when he kicks the bucket, We can make more money for corporate, the corporate coffers. And now pushing everyone that works for them onto public assistance. Somehow the inverse of making them, their stockholders, not have not make it rain for a year and take a hit for a change. That's somehow theft. That's somehow, grift. That's somehow parasitism. But enforcing and pushing people into poverty is not parasitism. So, if you think that that's an issue, or you have an issue with $15 minimum wage, like you're morally kind of fucked up.
Yeah. One of the titles of the Reddit Economics Forum is The Dismal Science, and that comes from an oligarchical point of view. That because humanity is flawed, that there's always too many people. I first read it in Thomas Malthus, which in fact economics could actually lift humanity to, one, explore the oceans, which we still haven't done yet, and two, space, which you can do through the power of economics and cooperation. Instead, it's the dismal science.
Yeah, and the dismal science is called that because you leave the money power to its own devices, and it does the same thing every time. And so when I say I have a really functional theory of ruling class power and oligarchy and imperialism, enough to forecast events happening in the near future, and then those are proven to be correct, it's because once you know how the money power moves and operates, that it has a very simple intelligence ultimately that governs the entire body of the system. So just building that level of understanding is essential in order to be able to combat it and understand what you're against. So we are resuming our Peter Schiff breakdown, attacking the demagogue Peter Schiff and his self-interested cartoon crackerjack ideology. I want to read a little tract here from the Tragedy and Hope, what I'm reading, Carol Quigley's Landmark, originally published in 1966. It's a 1,300-page book. So far I'm 50 pages into it. It's fantastic. I recommend it. It's probably going to make my top 10 for sure, even my top 5.
Harry Potter.
Oh my God!
They were moving off the list.
Yeah, sorry. The Half-Blood Prince. You're off the list.
That was the best one too.
Was it? I read the first one. I was like, this is for children.
Dumbledore dies.
Oh, that's sad. All right. Anyway, the different stages of capitalism have sought to win profits by different kinds of economic activities. The original stage, which we call commercial capitalism, sought profits by moving goods from one place to another. In this effort, goods went to places where they were less valuable and to places where they were more valuable, while money, doing the same thing, moved in the opposite direction. This valuation, which determined the movement of both goods and money, which made them move in the opposite direction, was measured by the relationship between these two things. So he's talking about the inverse relationship between goods and money, and how they're actually rather antagonistic. The problem with the basis problem of libertarianism is they can't distinguish from money and goods. And because the ideology has been created to mask these really old trends in political economy.
Thus, the value of goods was expressed in money, and the value of money was expressed in goods. Goods moved from low-price areas to high-price areas, while money moved from high-price areas to low-price areas, because goods were more valuable where prices were high, and money was more valuable where prices were low. Thus, clearly, money and goods are not the same thing, but, on the contrary, exactly opposite things. Most confusion in economic thinking arises from failure to recognize this fact. Goods are wealth, which you have, while money is a claim on wealth, which you do not have. Thus, goods are an asset, money is a debt. If goods are wealth, money is not wealth, but negative wealth, or even anti-wealth. These always behave in opposite ways, just as they usually move in the opposite directions. If the value of one goes up, the value of the other goes down, and in the same proportion. The value of goods expressed in money is called prices, while the value of money expressed in goods is called value. So there's just some post-New Deal wisdom about economics, which is really rare. This is not normal in the antagonistic relationship of finance capital. When we're talking about actual economics in like the real world sense of, I'll call it working people's economics, we could have an economic system right now that had 1/10 the actual financial capital, but if it was actually capitalized differently and bound down and limited to only express actual, true, real, objective economic value, we'd all be immensely richer. So that the idea of money being a direct correlation to value in the economy is completely false. It needs to be debunked every step of the way. This part of the book in Tragedy and Hope, up to page 50, is really going through the antagonistic relationship between the consumer, the producer, and the shipping interests at the time, which are very pronounced. And this is also what's kind of happening nowadays. Where you look at the shipping interests, they were the couriers of value and money, and they kind of have been replaced by like large-scale Wall Street banks in the modern sense. But the same kind of inclination is there. And anyway, really fascinating book, really touching on some good stuff. So we're going to continue, just with that in mind, we're going to continue with Schiff.
I'm paying Social Security taxes, even though I know it's a Ponzi scheme. If it was a free market, I wouldn't be paying.
And you would have to be able to say whether or not you wanted to contribute.
So it's a Ponzi scheme? Does that mean it's like every pension fund is a Ponzi scheme?
No, it seems like pension funds, you can draw on them.
So it's different because the government's doing a pension fund, so it's a Ponzi scheme, I guess, right? Because if it's a pension fund, our wonderful friends in Wall Street, they're more trusted with the money than the federal government is, I guess, Schiff's point. I don't know. This is the point he's making, apparently.
And benefit from it. It's like an opt-in. If it was an opt-in thing, would you be willing to?
I would opt right out. I mean, I would give up. But first of all, I don't even think the government. Why is the government?
He would opt out because he's a millionaire. Also.
Yeah, all his arguments are always very specific to himself and people like him, and there are never any sort of breadth or depth to his sort of counters to everything.
And what about morality of like, what do you do for the least among us? What do you do for like the poor, the meek, the sick, the elderly, like the children? Schiff, just cavalierly doesn't give a shit about those people.
Involved in Social Security. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives the government the authority to take care of this. Look, if I want to buy insurance...
that's not true at all. There is a couple times where it talks about the general welfare.
Yeah, it mentions the general welfare twice, which Hamilton really fought to get that language in there. Go read the Confederate Constitution of the Confederate States of America from 1861 to 1865. They made damn well sure that it had zero mentions of the general welfare. The idea that the government can work for the general good is, another radical American ideal, the radical revolution of the American Revolution. And of course, Schiff is completely hostile to that idea.
Hates Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Hates the post-Enlightenment thinking.
Mm-hmm.
For my old age, let me buy it in the private sector. I mean, and let me save on my own.
Where does most of the money go? Where does most of the money go when you buy insurance?
Well, if you buy legitimate insurance, the money is invested, right, and it grows so that when...
As if in Schiff's worldview we can differentiate between legitimate and non-legitimate because there's no financial regulation. So it's just Wild West investment companies. Look at any of the rail booms or the tulip bulb mania or any kind of like
South
bubble.
Sea bubble.
Yeah, South Sea bubble. Any kind of like mania in the population of economics, and he's saying just go out to the private sector. Once again, it's relying on institutions of regulation that he previously dispelled, but now he's saying those exist, or just implying that they do exist.
that he could pay off, whether you're buying life insurance, fire insurance, auto, the insurance companies invest the money, and, some people put in claims, other people don't. But for retirement, a funded pension system, a legitimate system, you take money as you work, and you invest it. And over time, compounding interest or the investment returns, eventually, based on your contributions and the gains and the
if you're in the private sector, what if that bank goes belly up?
Yeah, then you're shit out of luck.
Shit out of luck.
Or what if they, in the 2008-2007 financial crisis, were selling their clients garbage and were laughing about it? Because what else are you going to do? Are you going to sue me? I own the government.
Good luck.
Investment of the interest and the dividends, you accumulate an asset, a portfolio of stocks and bonds or whatever, real estate, whatever you bought, that you can live on. You can live off of your income from your investments.
Now, how is that different
what if you
than
can't?
how Social Security?
What if you can't live on that? Oh, that piece of property I bought, turns out can't live on it. There's such and such. I don't know.
Yeah, even looking at like no fault parts of what they call creative destruction in the market. So you make some kind of thing, and then that whole industry gets totally swept aside by technological progress.
I own a gluten bakery.
Yeah, a gluten bakery, not even wheat, just pure gluten. Oh, turns out it's bad. Or even something that's been just completely and utterly automated and isn't needed at all anymore. That increases the entire wealth of the society, but the people that are put out of work in the short term from it suffer. Should they just go, you have nothing but your eyes to cry with in Peter Schiff's worldview?
He handles it.
What
happens when your money goes into Social Security?
They spend it. The government spends it on current Social Security recipients. They spend it on the war in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Okay, so they spend it on current Social Security recipients. So the money that goes in pays for the people that have paid their whole lives into the system and now rely on it. That's exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and look at other countries like Sweden or something like that actually have had a large pension fund. We can't even get to the point of entrusting the government with active account interacts in markets and world systems because of our government is so corrupt and so rotted out with all these different parasitical interests. But if that existed, the Social Security fund may be even able to make a lot more of a return. Right now, Social Security money is invested in treasury bonds, which have practically no yield. So if it was an actual active investment account, can you imagine the pressure that person would be under? You'd be getting death threats from Lloyd Blankfein.
To invest with them?
If you have a large institutional investor that is actually holding the government pensions, you better watch those people like a frickin' hawk. Right now, it's largely sank into treasury bonds, which is better than just holding. What does he want them to do? Stuff it under the mattress in the White House or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
On the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, wherever they are, they spend it on the war on drugs or on
poverty. He's trying to conflate Social Security with enabling.
But there's nothing there. But
you don't know what you're spending on what. Because it's just a bunch of money.
Yeah, but there's also no return because there's no compounding. You don't generate anything, and so
well, that's not true either. They're not holding it in cash. This argument would be like if the Social Security trust fund was held in cash. Yeah, that'd be stupid. You'd want to put it in something with a return. So they put it in treasury bonds. Whatever.
The only way the government can pay you the money when you retire is if they can get it from somebody else. But, how is the baby bust, right, the Generation X, going to pay for the retirement of the baby boom? It's impossible. They don't even,
It's impossible.
Impossible. Can't do it.
Can't do it. I like how it reminds me of The Economist, well, and actually not even The Economist, but other kind of like-minded financial commentators. We're there's no way that Russia's going to try to do anything with Ukraine or try to preserve their interest in Ukraine. Look at their market. Look at their stock market. Look at this commodity market. Look at this oil market. And it's are you guys fucking crazy? Look at the Battle of Stalingrad. These people lost 10% of their population in World War II. And you think they're not going to fight for their survival because of some fucking stock market?
Yeah.
These people with these financial aggregates get so obsessed with their own models of how they understand the world that they start thinking that their model is reality.
Well, completely blinded by it.
Have the incomes, they're loaded up with debt themselves. If you've got a bunch of college debt, not only do you have to pay that, but you got to pay somebody's Social Security and their Medicare. It is impossible.
Well, how can we deal with college debt? Since college education, I would say, is an absolute national interest. Perhaps we could open up a credit window at the Federal Reserve.
It's the banks operate within this cartel of having stole the Federal Reserve away from the public trust. Now, everything that happens outside of that, then that's the the privileged Brahmin class of economics. We don't talk about that. But then the wider populace is subject to taxation, subject to all this hardship, and they don't get access to the golden goose.
but that's somehow just unapproachable, right? He's never approaching that. Hey, let's take that golden goose back from Lloyd Blankfein.
So we've got to admit, the politicians have to admit all the false promises that they made in order to buy votes, right? That's what they do. They promise something for nothing because that's what people vote for. People are dumb enough to do that. They vote for something for nothing. But, there's nothing more expensive than something you get for free from the government.
Oh, that's so wise.
That's like Milton Friedman.
It's like a fortune cookie. There's nothing more expensive than something free.
Yeah, wow, that's true. Because I work for everything in my life, so the idea that you can actually shape macroeconomic policy, radically increase everyone's standard of living or not, leave that to the bookworms, right? Who cares, right? I'll just go work at my shitty, exploitive minimum wage job, and then just listen to Schiff. The idea we can shape our destiny is totally never in his
how
calculations.
Expensive all this free stuff is. But we got to level with people and say, look, there is no trust fund, there is no money there, and so let's end the program.
There's no money there. Once again, if you own any treasury bonds, mail them to my address, which will be on the website. They're not worth anything. Yeah, whatever.
According to Peter Schiff, all those T-bills.
Stuff your T-bills in. Hey, China, you guys want to deleverage some of your T-bills? Stuff them in an envelope and then send them to my P.O. box. And I'll be glad to take them.
Program. Let's stop it. And then let's figure out how to deal with the people who unfortunately now, because of this program, now depend on this program, but who would have been self-sufficient if the government had let them plan for their own retirement.
And also deal with
or
the unemployment of all the people that worked in the various organizations.
Well, no, that's good unemployment. They're going to get jobs.
Good unemployment.
Good unemployment.
Yeah.
Because it follows the model in his head of what it should be. So if there's hardship and tragedy under that model, it's good.
I really despise paying federal income taxes. It's so complex nowadays that especially if you start owning anything or getting any kind of complexity to your federal tax liabilities, it feels like you're preparing yourself for a legal defense. It's rather ridiculous. There are jobs that are completely unproductive. Financial manager is probably one of those. It doesn't produce anything. Most jobs in the modern context don't produce anything, or don't create any value, or they create negative value. So a lot of those jobs, if they didn't exist, would be better, but only if those people were actually doing something constructive and positive and productive. He's trying to muddy the waters of it's good to have more people unemployed. Well, it depends on what they're doing, but it's not good to have those people unemployed per se. But yeah, I agree that some of those jobs shouldn't exist.
Yes, because if we get rid of all these government rules and regulations, there will be jobs for them. I don't want them working in government
just a
because
non
now I have to
sequitur.
pay their salary.
Totally just making that up. That's somehow evident or proven. Well, why should it be? Nothing in your worldview has yet been proven to us, Schiff, so please just leaning on stuff that he hasn't proven yet.
Private sector, I don't want to employ all these bureaucrats. Especially when the average bureaucrat is making more than the average person who's paying the taxes that pay the bureaucrats.
Well, that's because the bureaucrats have unions. Even though most of the working class has not got a return on the past couple of decades of technological explosion, which has resulted in massive productivity increases, the fact that the unions in the public sector have irked out some of that wealth for themselves. Now that's where the class warfare should take place, according to Schiff, between the poor and the slightly less poor. Yeah, fight amongst each other. Meanwhile, us one percenters will be over here eating caviar and doing lines of coke.
They just gave everybody in Washington a 1% pay raise. Who can afford that? They should be giving these guys pay cuts. But part of
1%. Microsoft usually gives people 10% pay raises. Or in their heyday, they were giving massive increases. Yeah, but why shouldn't that be more widespread? What is preventing just the increase in everyone's standard of living year after year? Well, it's because finance has totally figured out and rigged the system to deprive everyone of all their economic growth. And they're doing it magnificently, spectacularly, to the point where people don't even know that they should be enjoying more and more economic prosperity every year.
Deal to fund the government was to give everybody a raise in Washington. They're already overpaid.
Excellent argument. So, Department of Energy, dead. Department of Education, gone.
Yeah, even though the Department of Energy was brought in as an umbrella organization to keep all these other research facilities in line, so they wouldn't have another Oak Ridge, so they wouldn't have another Alvin Weinberg, so they wouldn't have any more thorium or any kind of thing that would upset the market, that those should now be defunded. When they don't even do anything anyway. I mean, I guess I could, maybe you agree with them, right? Because they don't do shit. Look at Stephen Chu or like Monitz. They don't do anything. They're there to like make sure that there's no technological investments or increases.
On Social Security, go fuck yourself. What do we have left? How do we deal with?
Well, we got to cut defense massively.
That's the next question.
Yeah. Well, the problem with the military is it's not the Department of Defense now; it's the Department of Offense. Right?
Yeah.
What we need to do is mind our own business. Right? We need to stop stirring up hornets' nests and then being surprised when we get stung somewhere.
Peter Schiff, freedom ain't free though. Don't you know?
No. I'm not saying that we're not vigilant. I want to have a military that's strong enough that nobody's going to want to screw with us. But we've got that many times over. In fact, all we're doing is instigating. Sure. If we just mind our own business and protected our own borders, right? No one who's going to in fact, who's going to be dumb enough to attack America, I mean, in a real way. I mean, a terrorist, okay, but what nation is going to launch a war? Nobody. I mean, there is no threat. This is ridiculous. But we are
But he's also not, he's not unveiling what the interests are behind keeping that status quo. That it's somehow the runaway bureaucrats in Washington that are doing that? No, not at all. It's imperialism. I never hear him mention the word imperialism. Or if it does, it's in passing. You know, it's not breaking it down as an actual system. It's military overstretch or something like with bases in other countries. But not like defining that as some kind of rigorous system. He doesn't do that. And for good reason, because his class is of the same class that's perpetuating that war machine.
Threats that wouldn't exist if we had a more defensive posture. Why do we have all these bases all over Europe? I mean, the Soviet Union is gone. This is the problem. It's like once you create a government department, they never go away. So we have all this NATO. We built up all this stuff in Europe because of the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union is gone. Why are all the bases still there? Why are all the troops still there? This is all government bureaucracy.
Yeah, and 1991. When the Soviet Union imploded and they had their guy Bush in the White House, like, why didn't they do that? You know, it was a failure of leadership. And the military-industrial complex wants to keep getting the weapons contracts and blah, blah, blah. So it's not, the financial interest is not being directly exposed here, right? Which it should be. Mm-hmm. He's just, once again, talking about just, not scratching the surface of the stuff.
Just perpetuating itself. I mean, we can't even afford it. But we got if Europe wants our troops there, then let's invoice them. Let's say, you know what, we got all these troops in Germany. This is what it's going to cost you, Germany, to keep these troops there. If you think you need them, if you don't want them, then we're going home. And but that's what we need to do. We need to dramatically reduce what we're spending on the military. But I think the military should be a much higher percentage of the federal budget than it is today. Because that's what the federal government should be doing, protecting us from foreigners. Let the state governments protect us from local criminals. Let the federal government protect us from international criminals. But that's it. But, right now the government is doing all these things that it shouldn't do.
He just kind of mentioned that the moot point of even having like a large-scale military anymore. And it's true. If you have a war with Russia or China, the whole planet's killed. All life on the planet is destroyed. Mm-hmm. All human life is destroyed. Civilization is destroyed. You'd be lucky for the human species to even survive. So this whole kind of system of armaments and posturing and positioning is already irrelevant. It's either going to result in extinction or
we'll get past it.
Or you'll keep, postponing the extinction, but it can only result ultimately in extinction. So, yeah. So the fact that China is going to be pursuing thorium and leaving us technologically in the dust is not anything of just national interest that we should be doing to one-up them. Let's have a peace race, right? Let's try to pursue peace and technological advancement. Let's have a competition based on that. Seeing things with the old worldview.
That it can't even do the things that it's supposed to do effectively.
Now, when you hear the Eisenhower speech when he was leaving office and he warned of the military-industrial complex, that's essentially what he was warning us about. The fact that business has arisen that profits off of war, and once it becomes big, like any bureaucratic institution...
He's already using the... hey, if you're going to make a quick buck, then you got to do it. It's like he's already back to that. You can see, hey. So what? Either... Which one is it? That somehow anyone ever pursuing a profit interest should ever be held accountable for their own actions? That's somehow not in Schiff's situation, the way he's already apologizing for it.
Any gigantic corporation, like anything that has too much power and influence,
Yeah, look, we're the warfare state, we're the welfare state, all of that has to end. You know, I don't want the guns or the butter from government, right? I want the freedom. I just want government to secure liberty. That's why it's there.
So
that's
larger percentage of money goes towards defense, but less money.
A lot less.
And how much less?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know if we're going to run this motherfucker correctly. We're going to have to sit down.
He doesn't know, even though that's his job.
Yeah, to look at numbers.
Yeah.
Or he could be proposing a budget. Hey,
Yeah.
he was Ron Paul's special economic advisor for his campaign. Just look at numbers. Like, what programs do you want to cut?
All of them.
He always, has to group the public welfare economic policies, coupled them with wasteful wars as a part and parcel of the same thing.
Yeah.
So making education accessible to inner city youth or just people in general, that you would want to encourage that
it's a national interest.
As a natural interest is just somehow equatable with wasteful wars, really? Like, he doesn't care how his tax dollars are spent, right? If it's making increases in technological progress or educating people or making people healthy or giving whatever to anybody, that's somehow on the same level as killing people. It's a rather weird way of looking at things. I drink wine out of a mug.
Yeah, me too.
It's the kind of man I am.
You should be ashamed of yourself, but I understand.
There's time for that later. Loading movie. Wow. Your feature presentation. Our wireless here. Oh yeah, you didn't. You're on the wireless. The wireless sucks. I can see like a dozen wireless networks around my house. Plus, there's like a smart meter right on the side of that wall, rating it. Giving us radiology therapy. Giving us creating and killing our tumors at the same time.
Mm.
Oh, hey, what's up?
All right, so we were like 2 hours and.
But what's the federal government doing? The federal government is making it impossible for a guy that opens up a store to sell marijuana. He can't have a bank account because the banks are afraid of money laundering. He can't rent an office. He can't rent a storefront because of the forfeiture laws. The government's going to come in.
Banks aren't scared of money laundering. They do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Just from
their
own cartel. Yeah. They have cartels preferences like HSBC that's been well documented.
Mm-hmm. They're Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, and they're initially running opium money anyway, so they got a lot of experience in that field.
Washington treats us much worse than the British did. I mean, King George never could have got away with this stuff.
If this is the case, should we actually be hoping that everything falls apart? Because in fact,
that was dumb. King George would have never been able to get away with this stuff.
Right, and then Rogan's falling into the same camp of saying, should we hope that everything falls apart? This is the modern libertarian position. Hope for anarchy, hope for chaos, because somehow, you and your von Hayek book are going to march to Washington and then solve the world's problems with your non-understanding of anything.
Yeah, anti-historical view.
Let's not actually educate ourselves now so we can propose solutions. Let's just wait until everything gets so bad that we're in Somalia with nuclear weapons, nuclear ICBMs, and all kinds of massive military armaments all over the place. And then after we're reduced to total chaos and anarchy, somehow, God will show the way.
Yeah.
That might be the only way that all this gets changed.
Ironically, yeah. Because,
yeah, he's pro-anarchy.
It's going to fall apart, right? Eventually.
Eventually.
The better. Because the longer it takes, the worse it's going to be. Because we are getting,
It's like the fundamentalists who want to provoke the apocalypse.
Right?
Bring it on, because,
sooner that the phony economy collapses, the
system,
sooner we can start replacing it and building a legitimate economy. So, yeah, I know this huge economic crash is coming. That's way worse than 2008. If it happens in 2014, it won't be as bad as if it happens in 2015. And if it happens in 2016, well, that's even worse than 2015 because we're going to have that much more debt. It's going to be that much bigger.
I like how debt is somehow insurmountable. Debt is like an avalanche or like a volcano or like an earthquake. Just a
pyroclastic cloud.
Yeah. Debt is a pyroclastic cloud. You can't reason with it. It can't be talked about. It's just this unstoppable natural force where, you can default on debt. Debt is a political construct. You can say, we have too much debt. We're going to write that debt off. And the people that own that other side of that debt, they're going to have to take a loss. That idea is nowhere in his calculus, right?
No, because he would take a loss.
Because he would take a loss, right? Anything is launch the missiles before Schiff has to take a loss.
The bigger the fallout when it bursts. So the sooner we can stop doing the wrong thing, the sooner we can start doing the right thing.
So explain to me how it
does
collapse.
Quips.
So let's say
Yeah, bumper sticker philosophy.
Yeah, just a series of bumper stickers make up his worldview.
A worst case scenario, it goes to shit in 2016. It survives another couple of years limping along with Band-Aids on, and then one day it implodes. What happens?
Well, this is my best guess for how it's going to happen, right?
So now it's like Nostradamus, we're going to get into the Nostradamus predictions of how implosion looks. Yeah. Rather than prescribe solutions to the thing, we're just going to make better analogies and weave better prose about how it's going to look when it all comes crashing down.
The economic data is going to start to come out weaker than a lot of people think. I think the jobs numbers are going to deteriorate. And of course, they never really improved. I mean, the reason the unemployment rate has come down, it's not because the unemployed have found jobs. It's because they've stopped looking. They've left the labor force, and now they're collecting disability checks instead of unemployment checks. But
or just starving.
The numbers are going to get worse. Janet Yellen is going to be
by the way,
chairman, and she is going
collect the disability over nothing. I would say that. I would much rather have a person on disability that maybe could be able-bodied to work but can't find a job than just not being able to survive at all. But I'm a softie.
To prescribe more quantitative easing. And so they're going to reverse this tapering process, and they're going to do more quantitative easing. Now, everybody is assuming that the Fed is going to continue to reduce these purchases and eventually unwind their balance sheet. And, of course, that's impossible. I was saying that from the beginning, that, there was no exit strategy, that it was a lie, that they had checked into a monetary roach motel, that, once they had committed to this, that it was, they couldn't stop, and if you live by QE, you die by QE. And so the Fed is going to come in, and they're going to do more quantitative easing. They're going to print more money to try to bring interest rates back down, to try to artificially stimulate the economy. But the market is expecting the reverse to happen. And as a result, the dollar...
I don't know what he's talking about exactly.
Well, if you wanted to actually stimulate the economy, you stop using that money, that QE, to buy Wall Street, what are they?
Garbage.
Derivatives.
Worthless derivatives.
And invest in infrastructure and science technology.
It's a cash for trash program. Basically, Lloyd Blankfein wheels up a wheelbarrow of credit default swaps and all this other alchemical garbage they concoct that they don't even know what they're selling. Some kind of a spread swap / derivative transfer commodity index price maturity or something like that.
Sounds profitable.
Yeah, and it's just a total... Most of them are illegal forms of insurance or some kind of way to game the market and get some kind of dominant position and keep some kind of price at some artificial level based on some kind of hyper trading or something like that.
They're just trash. And so the idea that this money could be spent for something much, much more productive and better. Never, ever does that come out of his mouth about what this should be doing.
The power of the central bank can somehow only ever be used in his worldview to funnel
money to Wall Street.
Because that's all, that Wall Street is a cartel and they've controlled the central banks, and this is what they make them do. It's not what China's doing. They're doing the opposite. Oh, you've really done it now, so
messed it up.
I'm going to chop that finger off.
Oh, hey, what's up, everybody?
You have a computer right here. We're doing this with my cell phone.
Yeah, well, my computer's like more soft-spoken than Noam Chomsky.
And as a result, the dollar has risen a little bit. Gold prices have come down. Markets come up because people are optimistic about a legitimate recovery. When they realize that it was false optimism and that the Fed is going to do even more monetary stimulus because none of the other stimulus worked, right? And that's what they do in Washington. If something doesn't work, you don't
did they try any other kind of stimulus?
Not that I know of.
They never tried a credit stimulus. They never offered credit to actual productive enterprises in infrastructure building, which could get us out of the Depression in a day. I mean, the process could start within a day of reversing the trajectory of the Depression.
Yeah.
That's nowhere in the calculations, of course, right?
Just do more of it and just assume it will work if you do it bigger. So I think when that happens, you're going to see a lot of downward pressure on the dollar. It's going to really start to fall on foreign exchange markets, and that's going to have a profound impact on consumer prices, price of gasoline, price of food, stuff like that. And now the Fed is going to be looking at CPI inflation, which is much higher than it should tolerate. But the Fed can't do anything because the Fed raises interest rates to fight that inflation. The stock market will crash, the real estate market will crash, and all the big banks that we bailed out are going to fail again. Only now they're going to have...
Yeah, they need to fail again. They're bankrupt. They need to be put through liquidation. Like, they don't have any assets of any value. They have like some office buildings and some desks, some phones, maybe some computers. Mm-hmm. That's all they're worth. They're totally bankrupt, right? So they need to be liquidated, but you don't want a deflationary crash as part of that situation, which is what you'd get now. So you'd get a total implosion of the economy if the major banks went down, like way worse than 2008. So how do you deleverage this system and like propose solutions to it? Well, you start by taxing Wall Street transactions. You start by nationalizing the Federal Reserve and issuing credit only for productive enterprises. And you kind of atrophy off that limb of like this rotten, bloated, speculative mass of derivatives, and just let it wither on the vine until it just falls off.
Have even more debt, so we'll be at an even worse financial crisis in 2008. So the Fed can't let that happen, so they got to print even more money. But now the dollar goes down even more, and now inflation is even bigger. And maybe for a while the government will try to...
Hold on. Inflation is one of these mystical words that even people that are, like, I respect, like, don't really use it in the right ways. Because it's a word that is so broad in meaning and so differential in meaning, it's really worthless. Like, it's almost a completely worthless word. Because when Schiff says inflation, he means money supply growth. But that doesn't tie to inflation directly. And so, he also means wage inflation too, kind of as a secondary meaning. But neither of those is directly true. We've had massive explosions of the monetary supply, of the credit supply, and almost no inflation in terms of wages at all. It's actually been negative. It's actually been wage deflation. Wages are down, yet all your prices for commodities are up. Well, this is what happens when you dump endless amounts of money into Wall Street. It all goes into the financial aggregates. Some of those are based on commodities. So you're paying more for gas, you're paying more for copper, you're paying more for just the things that things are made out of. But in terms of your wages, you're getting less and less and less. And that's the goal of QE. The goal of QE is to drive down your own currency value so you can cheapen your labor supply comparative to other countries in the world. And by turn, you can like try to price other people out of the market by debasing your own labor. And so it creates this race to the bottom, even amongst the first world countries that are trying to one-up each other in debasing their own labor and cheapening the labor by QE. And this is what you get. It's a universal war on labor between all the major first world powers.
Convince us that inflation is good for us and that we should be happy because at least we're not suffering deflation. But at some point...
Which is even worse. Which is what you already have in the wage market, right? So it's, once again, if you had the direct credit stimulus... Federal Reserve opens a window, that goes to solely infrastructure projects, you would have wage inflation. Now that means that your wages would be going up every year, but for the financier class, for the owner class, for the non-worker class, the people that just own as a living, that's inflation. That's bad inflation because your worker bees are requiring more and more money. But it's all on how you manipulate the system. If you want it to be in favor of labor, then you engineer it accordingly. If you want it to be in favor of finance capital, you engineer it accordingly. And Schiff is once again just totally on the side of finance capital while pretending to be your friendly neighbor.
Where the Fed is going to have to either dramatically raise interest rates to protect the dollar and stop hyperinflation and allow...
once again, currency controls don't exist. So just forget about that. Even though the IMF suggests them. The IMF itself says for third world countries to use currency controls. Don't use currency controls. So allow endless speculative flow of hot money in and out of your currency to blow your currency up. Like, Iceland did because they didn't impose currency controls, so they lost half of the value of the krona. Ideas of actually preserving anything in the mainstream working people's class using the government power or authority, totally alien. Can't do that. Sorry. The government's tools are only there for use by finance capitalists to make a quick buck off your back.
Allow the markets to implode and allow a much worse financial crisis in 2008, or they're going to keep printing the dollar.
It's like the terrorists keep making demands, Peter Schiff, the terrorist. It's like, you will give me what I want, or else you're going to get a financial collapse much worse than anything you've ever seen. This is, once again, what he's saying.
Printed into oblivion, and then it's worthless, and then everybody is wiped out because no matter how much money you have, you don't even have enough money to buy a cup of coffee because the currency has been wiped out.
Money is wealth again.
Zimbabwe doesn't exist. Yeah. But so places that have hyperinflation, it becomes a barter economy. You find a way around it. It's bad for everybody, right? But it's just this apocalyptic thinking of like.
Now, when you deal with currency, this is where it gets really weird with people. Most people don't even understand what a dollar bill actually is, and they think somehow or another. A lot of people think that it's based on.
As Quigley beautifully, succinctly pointed out, a dollar is a debt based on a claim to pay something, right? That's all it really is. So I like that definition. That seems like a much better definition than whatever Schiff's going to be spouting out, don't you think?
Yeah,
thing.
I
Not fake that there's like a pound of gold
mean?
waiting somewhere for your $100 bill.
What is that? A claim to pay?
So if you have $1, that's basically an ownership of some future state in which you can exchange that for a good.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Well, it used more than a pound. I mean, not more than $100, obviously. But
Well, and that also gets back to the finance capital aspect versus the actual commercial or industrial capitalism too, right? That the growth of money itself is removed from actual goods and services, becomes a real parasitical thing because it becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger claim to pay, but there may not be an underpinning thing in the actual physical economy to correlate with that growth of the money supply. So when you look at like the over explosion of finance since the Reagan administration and like the financial demon being unchained and running amok, this is a lot of what you see, right? Like that there's an increasing growth of the 1%. There's all these rich people out there that really think they're rich, and they act as if they're rich, and the society treats them as if they're rich, and they have a lot of money, right? But they're like fundamentally, what do they contribute or own that is of any value? A lot of these people are invested in like derivative blocks, hyper trading investments. It's all really abstract and removed from any kind of value creation. It's actually antithetical to it. Yet they're rich in our society, right? There's this huge segment of population that needs to be deprived of their wealth power, what this gives them over society, because it fundamentally doesn't actually add anything to society whatsoever, and actually its continued operation is attriting and destroying society itself. It's just like the late French aristocracy or something. All these people in parties and having this lavish lifestyle, all at the expense of the actual working peasant. And how many of these parasites can eventually you sustain until, hey, we got to like depose you of your power because it's going to destroy
you
everything.
go back to the beginning. If you look at the Constitution and you read Article 1, Section 8 and Article 1, Section 10, you read them.
I almost said that before you even said anything because libertarians only like to cite Article 1, Section 8, and we're going to see why here in a second.
But it says that money is gold and silver.
It's the only part of the Constitution that exists.
And that's what's legal tender in the United States. And up until in 1971, we were on a gold standard. I mean, we were on a more pure gold standard before the Federal Reserve came in 1913. But we were always on some kind of standard. So the first dollars, right, were receipts for gold and silver. If you go back and you get an old dollar from before, let's say you had a $10 bill. It would say on the bill, pay to the bearer on demand, $10. The $10 wasn't a piece of paper. That was a representation. It was an IOU $10. The $10 was the gold. There was $10 worth of gold on deposit, and you could
sitting somewhere.
Yeah,
Fort Knox, right?
Yeah, in Fort Knox, and you could take your $10 to the U.S. Treasury, and you could say, "Give me my dollars. This is my receipt," because it actually was an IOU. It was a Federal Reserve note, even when it was a note, but it was a note payable in lawful money. The lawful money was the gold or silver, because there were some silver certificates, there were some gold certificates, but there was real money backing the notes, backing the currency.
And that money varied depending upon the price of gold and silver?
Well, the price of gold and silver
what
was
your
the
return
same.
would be? But your return
there was no,
never changed.
Yeah, there was real value.
Okay.
And when we had real...
So he's making an argument for gold standard, and also an argument against fractional reserve banking, or as it's just called in modern parlance, banking, because that's all it really is.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, here's another beautiful quote from Carol Quigley's book, because it really... Okay, in the course of time, however, some merchants began to shift their attention from the goods aspect of commercial interchange to the other, monetary side of exchange. They began to accumulate the profits of these transactions and became increasingly concerned not with the shipment and exchange of goods, but with the shipment and exchange of monies. In time, they became concerned with the lending of money to merchants to finance their ships and their activities, advancing money for both at high interest rates secured by claims on ships or goods as collateral for repayment. In this process, the attitudes and interests of these new bankers became totally opposed to those of the merchants, although few have either recognized the situation. It was kind of like, creeping under the radar there. Where the merchant had been eager for high prices and increasingly eager for low interest rates, the banker was eager for a high value of money, that is, low prices and high interest rates. Each was concerned to maintain or to increase the value of half the transaction, goods for money, for which he was either directly concerned with relative neglect for the transaction itself, which was, of course, the concern of the producers and the consumers. In sum, Specialization of economic activities by breaking up the economic process had made it possible for people to concentrate on just one portion of the process, and by maximizing that portion to jeopardize the rest. The process was not only broken up into producers, exchangers, consumers, but there were also two kinds of exchangers, one concerned with goods, the other one with monies, with almost antithetical short-term aims, that is, for the ones concerned with monies. The problems which inevitably rose could be solved and the system reformed only by reference to the system as a whole. Unfortunately, however, three parts of the system concerned with production, transfer, and consumption of goods were concrete and invisible, so that almost anyone can grasp them simply by examining them, while the operations of banking and finance were concealed, scattered, and abstract, so they appeared to the many to be difficult. To add to this, banksters themselves did everything they could to make the activities more secret and more esoteric. Their activities were reflected in the mysterious marks and ledgers, which were never open to the curious outsider, and of course obscured by all kinds of manner of academic quackery to put a smokescreen over what was actually going on. In the course of time, the central fact of the developing economic system, the relationship between goods and money, became clear, at least to bankers. This relationship, the price system, that is, depended on five things: the supply and demand for goods, the supply and demand for money, and the speed of exchange between money and goods. An increase in the three of these, demand for goods, supply of money, speed of circulation, would move prices of goods up and the value of money down. This inflation was objectionable to bankers, although desirable to producers and merchants. On the other hand, a decrease in the same three items would be deflationary and would please bankers, worry producers and merchants, and delight consumers, and parenthetically, who obtained more goods for less money. The other factors worked in the opposite direction, so that an increase in them, supply of goods, demand for money, and slowness of circulation of exchange would be deflationary. So it's saying that the interest between the financial bank, the banker that's concerned with monies over actual commercial banking, right, which is different, has interests that are antithetical to the consumers and the producers. This is not hit on by Schiff at all. From Schiff's point of view, it's an orthodoxy of you want to have sound money, you want to have deflation, a deflationary money supply. You don't want the growth in the money supply to equate to the actual growth in goods and services, or what it could be if maximized, because in that situation you have a growing money supply. I mean, I'm sure if we looked at the Chinese money supply, it had been growing a lot, exploding even, but it's not inflationary because it correlates with an actual increase in the amount of goods and services. Yeah. Right, so it's if you have 100 chairs, and that is your whole economy, and you live on an island economy, and you have 100 chairs and you have 100 clamshells that just represent that are money that represent chairs. Each one's good for one chair, and then you increase that by 50%, but you don't increase the amount of chairs. Well, then that's inflation. That's bad inflation, really, from the consumer and producer's perspective. But if that amount of clamshells is able to increase with the amount of chairs, then that's totally fine. That's actually better, because then the holder of chairs or clamshells is not being disenfranchised as just a natural course of the growth of the money supply. Right? So you only want the money supply to be growing in conjunction and bound completely to the actual growth of goods and services in the economy. But that's basically the opposite of what Schiff's saying, which is like you don't want it to grow at all unless it's for speculative purposes maybe. But then you want it to be frozen largely. If it's gold, it's going to be like tied down to a very specific one single commodity, not based on how much beef we can produce, how much chicken we can produce, how much iron ore we can produce, how many computers we can produce. All this stuff has nothing to do with the supply of gold whatsoever. But he's saying that it should be bound to that, because that will create a deflationary environment in which the holders of money will be massively benefited. I mean, look at the times in history which were on a gold standard. They were not pleasant. They were really, really bad for average working labor.
Real money, we had prices that went down a little bit every year because money gains value when it's legitimate. Right, but so if our money...
Money gains value when it's legitimate, right? It's just total self-interestedness, pretending to be a distinguished, principled position based on something other than just his own immediate self-gain.
Illegitimate. How does our economy ever recover?
Well, it's now counterfeit. What happened in 1971 when we went off the gold standard, right? The government basically repudiated...
When we went off the gold standard, there's different kinds of gold standards. He's not talking about Bretton Woods, obviously. He's talking about the actual domestic gold standard, which is bad. No one in a work, go get in a time machine, go talk to someone from 1890 about how great the gold standard is. This is the thing that blew out the farmers, crushed the farming class under the cross of gold, as Lloyd Garrison.
It did the Snopes monkey trial as well.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the thing, though. It's really simple. The amount of money cannot grow in proportion to the amount of goods and services that can exist. Then you create a system in which the holders of money are in a privileged position because you have to go between, they're an intermediary between every transaction, and their supposed quote-unquote good, which is just money, is actually worth much more than it should be because of the way they rig the systems, because they're creating an artificial scarcity based on gold.
Its promises. So instead of the $10 bill saying we'll pay to the bearer on demand $10, it just says $10. It's not. It's kind of like if I go to a coat check and I give them my coat and they give me a little claim check that says I owe you one coat, right? The claim check is just a receipt for the coat that the coat check has. But
this is the insulting nature of Schiff, right? That you can never actually talk about real-world historical events, or just even like thought experiments, like I just illustrated. That you have to make something like really crude. You pay a waiter this much, that's what you pay him. Blah blah blah.
Very simple.
Imagine if you went down there and you gave them your claim check, and they just crossed out the I owe you one coat, and they just gave you back your receipt that said one coat. Here's your coat. That's not my coat. Well, it says one coat. Well, it doesn't matter what it says. It's not a coat.
He's also alluding to the fact he's trying to impose that somehow gold has inherent value in a tangible sense, like you could eat it or like wear it as a coat.
Yeah.
A coat is much more useful than gold. I can use it to protect myself from the elements. I can not get hypothermia and die of pneumonia from having a coat. What is gold good for? It's only good for basically a mark of account, or basically that no one else is going to be able to replicate it and make more of it, unless they make fusion energy or something where you literally smash atoms and make it out of pure energy or some kind of
Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, but it just totally
right. The $10 bill, just because it says $10, it's not $10. It used to represent an IOU for $10. Now it's just a piece of paper.
Okay, yeah. Once again, Treasury bonds and Federal Reserve notes you can mail to the address that'll be on my website. Please just part with them as much as you'd like. I'm happy to take them.
But it doesn't represent anything. But right now, all we have is this fiat money, which means just let it be made. It's just paper money. And
that's not true. So if you want to look at fiat money, look at the continental dollar back in the American Revolution of the 1770s, 1780s. That was fiat. The government issues massive amounts of money into the economy based on no increase in value of goods or services. So it's hyperinflationary, right? It's just based on a decree or a fiat from the central authority that you're going to issue this much currency into the thing. It's going to be used to buy whatever resources you need for the war effort in the situation of the desperate conditions of the Revolutionary War. But that's totally different than a debt-based money system. We have a debt-based money system based on ability to repay. Like even when they're loaning money to these banks, it's based on these Wall Street banks. It's based on a prospect that they'll be able to repay that. So that's much different, right? That's not great, but it's not based on a credit system where you could actually have. Well, we know that technology is this, and we think we can take it to this level, and we're going to make our issuance of credit based on a future state of existence, based on a future condition that we can affect by technology and productivity and labor and all that stuff. So it's not a fiat system. A system.
The fathers, when they established
that's what fiat means. Let it be made?
Yeah, just let it.
The car company, that means let it be made.
I don't know, maybe, I don't know, but that's where fiat comes from. It's a Latin word.
Okay,
but it's not like paper money is new, right? They had paper money before the United States existed. In fact, we experimented with it in the Continental Congress. They issued something called the Continental, which collapsed, and they had an expression not worth the Continental. So people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams.
So we just talked about the Continental and talked about how it collapsed.
Right, which is totally different, which I brought up earlier.
Yeah.
Which is you have a debt-based money system. And that was the, old, I don't know where it came, well, I don't know, I could trace it back to Holland, basically where they had, William of Orange and the predecessors of them had the debt-based money system. And that enabled them, I can't remember the name of the war, the Dutch were able to defeat the British and the French in a war at the same time because they had access to this political technology, I guess you could call it, of a credit-based system. And that, would weigh them down with debt, blah, 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 whatever. But that was a huge improvement to a fiat money system or even a gold-based system.
These guys hated paper money with a passion. They knew how evil it was and how dangerous.
Is he talking about the Founding Fathers?
Yeah. he's equating fiat with paper.
So, according to the Libertarian Worldview, once again, the only two Founding Fathers were Jefferson and Madison. No one else existed, actually. Jefferson and Madison were they went and individually fought the whole Revolutionary War themselves. It was like Rambo and like Bruce Lee. And they, or like Neo and I don't know, whatever. They went and did that, and then they built the whole government themselves. And there was no disagreement among the Founding Fathers about how to run the country or anything.
It was. They didn't want any paper money in the United States. They wanted us to be on a gold standard. And so
how does he get away with this shit?
People don't call him out. That's why we're doing this.
How does he get away with something so blatantly false? So blatantly false. Hamilton was against a gold standard. One of the first political tracts that Franklin wrote back in the 1730s, I think, or even 20s, when he was I think he was a teenager in his early 20s. He wrote the article totally attacking the idea of a gold standard because they had just forced them back onto a gold standard and prevented them from emitting bills of exchange, basically IOUs, a credit system amongst the local economy in New England. So Franklin was against it. Hamilton was against it. Washington was against it because he supported the Bank of the United States. So the only ones that were against it or that were for his position were Madison and Jefferson when they were in the opposition figure of the government, when they were opposition figures before they actually took power in 1800. But later in their life, Jefferson totally recanted his free trade ideology, which was largely from Adam Smith. And you can find the quotes of them, like Madison and Jefferson, saying how wonderful Adam Smith was and that anyone that didn't read Adam Smith and didn't understand economics. And of course, Adam Smith was written to target the Southern slaveholders' position in America and to instill a false sense of political economy. Anyway, writing a book on that topic.
Had a bimetallic standard with gold and silver, and it served our country very, very well. But unfortunately, we did not listen to the wisdom. We forgot the wisdom of the founders, and now
apparently we forgot Hamilton, Franklin, Washington even existed. John Adams, who's that guy? I've never heard of him. There were.
I hate that. Forgot the wisdom of the Founding Fathers bumper sticker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we forgot Jefferson's wisdom from 1789 to when he got in power. But actually, when he got in power, he didn't actually govern how he was saying. So, what is their actual position? It's Jefferson and Madison when they were opposition figures in the government, but not when they actually took power. So, when you put all your eggs in the basket ideologically of someone that is an opposition figure in the government, that's really convenient because they don't have power. If I'm the opposition figure in any kind of parliamentary or even representative, whatever system of government, any kind of Republican institution of government, and I'm in the opposition, it's easy for me to seem like a total virtuous angel, right? Because I don't have power. I don't have authority. I'm basically a detractor. I'm a critic of whatever's going on. So you don't have to look at actually what I do. You only have to look at what I say, because what I say is all I can do. And so when they make Jefferson this hero of this era, they don't look at what he did after he actually got in power, which luckily, thank God for America, we probably wouldn't be here if Jefferson wasn't a total hypocrite and didn't govern exactly oppositely of how he said he was going to govern. Jefferson as a opposition figure compared to actually how he was in presidency is like night and day. And then plus also he recanted the total free trade ideology in 1816. So it's just layers of crap. So it's the Founding Fathers, quote unquote, two libertarians means only Jefferson and Madison, but only between 1790 to 1800. That's it. That's what they mean by Founding Fathers. They don't mean any part of actual Hamiltonian economics, which built the country and saved us from being re-enslaved by the British. John Adams, Washington, Franklin, which were all completely hostile to these free trade beliefs that, unfortunately, Madison and Jefferson fell prey to at the early part of their careers.
We have the exact kind of fiat money that the Founding Fathers wanted to make sure we never had because they knew what a disaster it would be, and we are going to have a disaster because we don't have real...
Once again, it's the continental dollar and the Federal Reserve note not equal to each other. Totally not equal. The government does not puke out hundreds of trillions of dollars into the open market of actual cash. They'll do it of debt, which is hugely different, right? And also, as part of the credit system that we represent, is much different because it's based on a future state, not what in the existing paradigm are you going to be able to pay us off? Are you going to be able to bring back 100 scalps from destroying your labor institutions in these countries and bring us back, a trophy? It's, hey, we know these technologies exist, or we know that there's prospects of these future technologies, and we're going to shoot for them, and we're going to base the money supply and the credit off of what we know that the spin-off technologies and the growth that they'll create. It's like the NASA model, the moonshot model.
Money. We have, this phony money, fiat money, and it is, the root cause of a lot of our economic problems. If we had honest money, we wouldn't have these problems. We wouldn't
Honest
have this.
money.
Yeah, who could be against honest money?
Honest money, guys. Another bumper sticker.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not for honest money, then guess what you're for?
Dishonest
You're
money.
for dishonest money.
money.
Yes, who could be against that? Total crap.
Have all this debt because it would be impossible for the government to have all this debt if they had to borrow gold.
It is quite impressive when you look back at what the Founding Fathers predicted and what they were trying to ward against and protect us against, and what an amazing job they did predicting it.
They were very enlightened men. They were very
Unlike
learned men. A lot of them self-educated. Some went to colleges too, but and this is
because he's anti-education. So just got to throw that in there. God, I'm self-educated too, but I also went to college, which really helped in my ability to self-educate myself.
Very bright man. So unfortunately, with all the population we have now, there's no way that Congress today can come even close. Maybe there's a couple of guys, but nothing like. Because we only had
Ted Cruz. He's blazing the trail of modern polymath and intellectual. It's once again, the Founding Fathers is idolized and held on a pedestal, but not actually analyzed or looked at.
Can't look at them at all.
Yeah.
Other than a
in
quote you can put on a bumper sticker.
Yeah, these broad, sweeping ways in which he somehow makes Madison and Jefferson the most leading figures of it. But that's a complete revisionist position. It's just totally false. Go read the histories of the whole era, and look how important Jefferson and Madison were. They were secondary figures in the whole realm. They were important. Madison's biggest contribution was building the Constitutional Convention and being a really leading figure in that. But
Federalist Papers too.
The Federalist Papers for sure. Yeah, totally. Right. But they're giving away too much clout. And Hamilton, people don't even know who the hell he is. He built the federal government. He built the whole economic system on which the country could survive. That's somehow just forgot about. And eventually
Washington is not talked about either.
Yeah,
except as this sort of stone figure on a horse.
Yeah. He's as this superhuman figure, which he really was by any modern comparison. But it's also it's so bad that I had to actually download Library of Congress direct scanned documents to make some UFA visual propaganda, or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, nice.
And I was transcribing these by hand because as disrespectful and as absurd as it seems. The fact of the matter is, a lot of the documents that Washington wrote or Hamilton wrote as Washington or whatever, because he was writing a lot of his papers, because they were both of very like mind on things, have not even been transcribed into digital text yet. So I'm downloading these cursive written documents from 1787 or ish, around there, before the actual founding of the country, and Washington saying things completely hostile to free trade. The idea of free trade, Washington was utterly and completely opposed to it. And these documents that I'm finding, they're not even been transcribed into actual written, typed font where you could download the actual digital copy of the actual text. And you want to fucking guess why? Well, because, of course, he's against free trade. Right? So, when Ron Chernow writes a book on Washington or something like that, and they totally ignore the political Washington, the economic Washington.
Mentions public credit one time in the whole book.
Yeah. He does? Really? That's impressive that they've been mentioned once.
Yeah, because we're talking about how they were able to fund the war effort and how they took from the British model, and the Dutch model.
Yeah, right, exactly. That was the technology of the time. So, that I'm having to actually trace over the cursive by hand with my own pen to understand what they were saying. And the thing that I'm unveiling on this paper is radically against free trade. And that's why those documents haven't been transcribed, right? So these ideas that Schiff's talking about, they're institutionally buried of what the Founding Fathers actually said because they're completely hostile to our existing system of expropriation, like how we're ripping off the whole third world.
Back then, and we had such an intelligent group of men in Congress. Compared to now, we're drawing off at 250 million, and we have a bunch of idiots.
Okay, what do we do about that? There's no Fort Knox.
Yeah, if they listen to Schiff, that problem is bound to only get worse and compound.
Anymore. There's no big fat pile of gold, right?
Well, you know that.
Where'd all that money go?
I don't know. We claim that there is a bunch of gold there, but it's interesting that Germany, which the United States, in addition to our own gold, right, we also store gold on behalf of a lot of other countries. So Germany a year ago,
at the point
asked
of a
for
gun,
half of their gold back. They told the United States government, "Look, we want half our gold."
It's like, hey, Germany, we have like 200 bases in your country. Do you know? You don't have that gold just on IOU, or
maybe you could give it to the guys running the T-34s through your country.
And we basically told Germany, okay, but it's going to take us 8 years to give it to you. Why?
Because we got to dig it out of the ground.
Yeah, I don't know. Now, meanwhile, it's been a year, and we haven't even come close to giving them 1/8 of it.
Good. Germany should watch its fucking mouth. How about that? He makes.
Yeah, our government's ran by a criminal mafioso-style cartel of oligarchs. So that's what you get. And don't look for Schiff for any kind of solutions to this crisis because his solution is don't educate yourself.
Burn it down.
Allow things to get worse.
Yeah, you want things to collapse. It's better if they collapse now than tomorrow. So the sooner you can bring it about, the better.
Yeah, you want those trained military police to be on your every street corner because you want total anarchy and societal implosion. Because somehow it'll be easier to get out of this pickle that we find ourselves under total martial law and borderline dissolution of society than just to educate yourself now and then be able to see through the garbage and then build a new political movement based on a semi-educated population.
Mm-hmm.
That's
with concrete goals.
That's radical. Right? Just let things collapse.
Some nice cars. Let's leave it at that. Don't get crazy. You guys are about that.
But they want their gold back because I think because they don't trust
ours, mine. When they die, who is it really?
That's why I think people. I think people should own gold. I own a lot of gold.
Oh, you one of those Alex guys? You got gold and dried food?
Well, I got more gold than dried food, but I think gold. I think gold's going a lot higher. That's why I have a gold company. I still, Your Pacific Precious Metals is my gold company, but I recommend that people.
Get that plug in.
Do you wear any gold? Do you wear fat chains around the house?
No, I got a little gold in my watch. I mean, I'm not very flamboyant.
Wear any ropes or anything like that?
No, I'm not.
Might be a good thing to have if the shit hits the fan.
Well, it's definitely valuable. I don't wear my gold. I have it in a safe.
Okay, so our money is not
good. Do it.
Gold.
So
there's no more
this thing that's supposed to be so valuable, you just put it in a box and hope that no one takes it, and then take it out and then exchange. It doesn't do anything. Right?
Reminds me of Henry Carey. The accumulation of gold is of a barbarous age, and that the idea of money should be flowing and should be circulating, and that's the natural state of what the new capital was, and that these old antiquated people he was talking about it back in 1840. Where these people have this mindset of these hoarding. It's like you watch Hoarders, right?
Yeah.
This is like Hoarders Peter Schiff edition with these stacking gold bars in his house. And it's this is going to be worth a lot later.
Like in Gulliver's Travels when he's hoarding diamonds on the deserted island.
Knox, we don't know what happened to all that.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if it's there or it's not there.
How do you not know, though? You're the guy.
Well, how am I supposed to know?
I'm not privy to this. Listen, ask me some questions about martial arts, and I'll give you some definitive answers.
Yeah, but I've never been down
you about economy.
No, but I don't know that. Look,
you've never been there.
I don't know. There.
I think Rogan brings up a really good point. Is that throughout this entire conversation, we've really never gotten any concrete definitive answers, as he's pointed out right there.
Yeah, and he won't try to make anything conclusive based off of indirect information, which unfortunately in politics is basically all you got to go off of. You're not actually going to be able to go down into Fort Knox and scratch the gold bars with your teeth, bite them in your teeth as you would a Spanish balloon, and find out if it's real.
Prospector.
People who have
wanted it all wanted
a Fort Knox, but they haven't had one. I mean, the government claims that the gold is there. I hope it's there.
Oh, Jesus.
But, as a gold investor, certainly if it's not there, the price of gold is going to go a lot higher because eventually the world is going back to a gold standard. I mean, there is no question in my mind that we will be back
on. Okay, well, once again, conflating gold standard with gold exchange between countries. So fiat money is the same as debt-based money to Schiff. Bretton Woods is the same as gold standard. as 1871. No difference. Issue of like stark contrast and night and day reality to people that work for a living. One they want, one they don't want. One is completely in their interest, one is completely not in their interest. Yet they're the same thing to show. Right? So he's has this big witch's cauldron and he's stirring these non-similar things together. You should want a new Bretton Woods system because it keeps the domestic credit issuance of the different countries under wraps. QE couldn't exist under this system. You couldn't have endless, huge, exploding trade imbalance with other countries, which is totally bad for domestic labor in this country. That wouldn't be able to exist. But once again, just dissimilar systems are the same shift. If those dissimilar systems, one is beneficial for labor and one is not.